the remains of the apple. So you can imagine people with runny noses. There'd be competition for the crick of the apple. That was, I tell you, it was really, it was nearly as bad as having a end of the chewing gum when they'd be finished with it. That's another story. When we went to the cinema, as I said, we used to normally go to the Regal, because the Regal was near where I lived in Mount St. Avenue. And it was 60, that was 3 jam jars, you have to think of it now, or 3 bottles, 3 empty bottles. That made sure if you were recycling, there was no need for recycling, because if you had a bottle, you brought it back and you got money for it. So everybody collected the bottles and that recycling happened automatically. And if we wanted to go to the cinema, we got 3 bottles, we sold the bottles and we went to the cinema. But if you, the year I made my first communion, it was the first time I was brought to the cinema at night, and it was in the Regal. And it was a very famous picture, a cowboy picture called Shane. And I still remember my mum buying a little box of whatever chocolates that she'd buy, and we had chocolates and Shane in 1954. But if you were really lucky, you could go down to the Savoy. The Savoy is, you know where Supermax is?
Yeah.
But that was a huge, big, lovely cinema. And upstairs there was a lovely restaurant in it. And you could have coffee, you could have cakes. They specialised in nice cakes and coffee. But the cinema, I always remember the cinema, the Savoy, because the commissionaire stand there, the man with a big red uniform on it and all big brass buttons, and all the people would be queuing up, and the commissioner, you couldn't queue up, you'd have to be very orderly, and this really important man with a big red uniform stand. And when you went into the cinema, then all the usherettes, the girls, would show you to your seat. They were all dressed in uniform, and it'd have a big long lamp, and if you were making noise, they'd be pointing the big lamp at you, the big torch at you. So, and then during the interval, half time as we call it, the girl would have a tray, and another girl would come around with a tray, and she said ice creams. So it was really, they'd sell ice cream in the cinema from a tray. It was really something else. But I used to think that the Savoy was Hollywood, because when you went into the Savoy, into Supermax, the manager's office was in the corner outside the front door, and he was a big, tall man with just thin, he was a very severe looking man, and he'd have a black coat on him and a dress trousers on him, and I think he used to wear a dicky bow, Mr. Devlin. And his office, if you looked into his office, the door was always open, because he was watching the front of the house. And all the film stars he had photographs, all the films, and they were all autographs. And I used to think this was Hollywood. Mr. Devlin's office was Hollywood in there. That's where it was, anyway. Going to the cinema up there. Let me see now, what do I want to say? Going to school. The big thing in school was, if you were any good, if you did your sums, we didn't get a gold star, you got a sweet out of a can. I don't know if they had a tin can with a hoop of wire on to carry and a lid on it. So anybody who did the sums right got a sweet from a can. And the sweets, when the sweets would be gone, you'd be sent down to the end of Barrack Street. There's a little park at the end of Barrack Street called Wise Park. I don't know if during spree there'd be things on it. But there was a factory there which used to make the sweets. And so sometimes the teacher said, will you go down to Hanley's and buy a gallon of sweet? They call it a gallon can of sweet. I suppose they call it a gallon of water or whatever. But Hanley's used to make sweet things like Peggy's legs. They don't have those anymore, do they?
Oh, yeah, Peggy's legs.
What's a Peggy's leg?
Oh, I don't know, but my mom was messing with me one time because my piggy bank's leg fell off. So
Peggy's leg, that was probably a pun. A Peggy's leg is a little long, round piece of sweet, and they used to make it, and the men, they had a big, huge, I can remember, you could go down and you could work after school down in the sweet factory, down in Hanley's, and you were paid, but your job was to wrap up all the Peggy's leg. Peggy's leg was about that length and about as thick as my finger, right? A sweet, to be wrapped up and paid. So you could go down after school, you could work wrapping up Peggy's legs, and you were paid in broken Peggy's legs. So if you put one Peggy's leg on there like that, and put another one across it, and you give it a little tap, it would break. So I gave up my career as a sweet wrapper after a week because I think I must have had about 1,000 broken Peggy's legs. But the sweets were made in a huge big thing like a concrete mixer. Like a big mixer. And when it would be done then they'd split it out. And the men would have it it would come out on a gigantic table like this. And all the men then in the factory would start rolling this gigantic heap to make it into a big long tube. And then they'd have a hook on the wall and they'd push it up on the hook and they'd be pulling it and stretching it. And then they'd come back and roll it with their hand. And the more they rolled it, like mortar, you know, when you roll it, it starts to get thin. So to start off maybe in a big drum, but as you rolled it, it got thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner. And then it would be long and they'd go along and chop it up and it'd harden, and that would be your Peggy's legs. So that was, that's what we did. That's what we did in my career as a Peggy's leg. As a Peggy's leg wrapper. We're coming near to the end anyway. But I'd just like to say, when we were kids, when we lived in Waterford, everybody was able to go to Tramore because there was the railway square, which is down at the bottom of the hill. You know where that big building is in Railway Square now?
Is that near where the Splash Road place is now?
Where is it? Yeah, well, the Splash Word is the Tramore station, but Railway Square in Waterford was the Waterford station. And we used to go down, and everybody, during the summer, my mother would bring everybody down, all the kids down, and we'd go on the train to Tramore. It was a steam train, you know. But I was very lucky because my father's brother, my uncle Tommy, was actually the engine driver. So my mum would bring you down and she might have 5 or 6 children because children were owned by everybody. So if my mum was going to Tramore, she'd bring, you'd all come, so she'd bring it, and I'd be sent up then to the ticket office and you'd buy a whole ticket for the adult and buy a half ticket for one child, and then you could bring in maybe a forest of children. So the whole children of the nation got brought for the price of a whole and a half and got out on the steam train. But I remember standing on the footplate of the steam train with Uncle Tommy, and if you opened the big door, the back of it was full of coal, and Uncle Tommy, then you'd have to shovel the coal in to make this train work. I used to think it was a marvellous thing that then you go to Tramore, and you get out where Splash World is. The building there, Splash World, is the station. And of course we'd be on the beach all day, and the big thing was to run down and hire a deck chair. My mum would give 6pence, I think, for a deck chair. One of these chairs, collapsible chairs that you'd sit in, and you'd sit all day in the deck chair. And then in the evening, the highlight of the evening was to go up to Carol's at the Lady Slip, and you'd buy a big kettle of hot water, and they'd make tea on the beach, and you'd have your sandwiches, your sandy sandwiches on the beach. And then when you'd come back home on the steam train back into Waterford, my dad would often meet us, and there's a shop in Manor Street, a big tree, O'Regan's, and they used to make little cones, and she used to dip them in some sort of red juice. I don't know what it was, but it was, I can just still see the little ice cream cones being dipped in O'Regan's.